The autumn of 1827 brought an air of mystery to the tranquil Yorkshire countryside. It was during this time that the arrival of Helen Graham and her young son Arthur at the long-abandoned Wildfell Hall set tongues wagging and imaginations running wild. Wildfell Hall, a dilapidated Gothic mansion, stood atop a hill like a brooding sentinel. For years, its windows had been dark and shuttered, a silent guardian of forgotten secrets. But now, as if awakened from a long slumber, wisps of smoke curled from its chimneys, and the faint glow of candlelight flickered behind grimy panes. The sudden signs of life sent a ripple of excitement through the sleepy village of Lindencar, nestled in the valley below. Helen Graham, a young widow in her mid-20s, cut a striking figure against the weathered stone walls. Her raven hair caught the light of the setting sun, and her piercing eyes seemed to hold depths of untold stories. She moved about the grounds with a quiet grace, her steps barely disturbing the carpet of fallen leaves. Her son Arthur, a bundle of energy with golden curls, was never far from her side. His laughter, bright and carefree, rang out in stark contrast to his mother's somber countenance. It was Gilbert Markham, the local farmer, who first caught sight of the newcomers. Out on one of his customary rides, the young man's horse had nearly reared in surprise at the unexpected movement at Wildfell Hall. Gilbert's heart raced, not just from the momentary fright, but from the glimpse he caught of Helen's face. For a brief instant, their eyes met, and Gilbert felt a jolt of electricity course through him. Before he could react, Helen had ushered her son inside, leaving Gilbert with a lingering sense of intrigue. News travels fast in small villages, and by nightfall, Mrs. Markham, Gilbert's mother and the self-appointed town crier, had spread word of the mysterious new tenants to every corner of Lindencar. Her voice, filled with equal parts excitement and suspicion, carried through the village like autumn leaves on the wind. A widow, they say, she'd whisper conspiratorially, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of fresh gossip. And with such a young child. Whatever could have brought her to such a place as Wildfell Hall? The shabby state of Helen's new home only added fuel to the fire of speculation. Wildfell Hall, once a grand estate, now stood as a shadow of its former self. Its gardens were overgrown, a tangle of weeds and wildflowers. The stonework crumbled in places, as if the very walls were trying to keep their secrets. Yet, Helen seemed unbothered by the decay, as if the mansion's faded glory offered her some form of protection from prying eyes. As days turned to weeks, the villagers began to notice Helen's artistic talents. She would often be seen perched on a rocky outcrop or seated in a meadow, her skilled hands bringing the rugged beauty of the Yorkshire landscape to life on canvas. The scratch of her charcoal against paper and the gentle swish of her brush strokes became familiar sounds carried on the autumn breeze. These paintings, it was discovered, were more than just a hobby, they were Helen's livelihood. The realization that she supported herself through her art added yet another layer to the enigma surrounding her. Villagers whispered about the unconventional nature of a woman making her own way in the world, their curiosity mingled with a touch of admiration and no small amount of suspicion. Young Arthur, meanwhile, became a subject of much discussion in his own right. His spirited nature and quick wit charmed many, but also raised eyebrows. Whispered conversations in the village speculated about his parentage and the circumstances of Helen's widowhood. Was there more to her story than met the eye? Did you see the boy's eyes? One villager would murmur to another. So bright and clever. Makes you wonder about his father, doesn't it? Despite the intense curiosity surrounding them, Helen maintained a polite but firm distance from her neighbors. Invitations to tea at the Markhams or Sunday dinner with the Millwards were met with gracious refusals. Helen's responses were always courteous, but left no room for further inquiry. "I'm afraid I must decline," she would say, her voice soft but resolute. "Arthur and I prefer our quiet evenings at home." Each rejection only served to intensify the mystery. What was Helen Graham hiding? Why had she chosen this remote corner of Yorkshire to make her home? The questions hung in the air like mist over the moors, unanswered and tantalizing. As autumn deepened, painting the countryside in hues of gold and crimson, Helen Graham remained an enigma. She moved through the village like a ghost, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in her wake. The villagers' attempts to engage with her were met with polite smiles and vague responses, each interaction leaving them more frustrated and intrigued than before. Gilbert Markham found himself increasingly drawn to the mystery of Wildfell Hall and its enigmatic tenant. He couldn't shake the memory of that first encounter, the brief connection he'd felt when their eyes met. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, Gilbert made up his mind. He would unravel the mystery of Helen Graham, no matter what it took. With determination in his heart, Gilbert saddled his horse as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The rolling hills of Yorkshire stretched out before him, a tapestry of green and gold. He urged his mount forward, following the winding path to Wildfell Hall. As he drew closer, the ancient stone building loomed ahead like a sentinel against the vibrant countryside, its secrets waiting to be discovered. The rolling hills of Yorkshire stretched out before Gilbert, a tapestry of green and gold. He rode his horse along the winding path to Wildfell Hall, the ancient stone building looming ahead like a sentinel against the vibrant countryside. Gilbert's heart raced, not from the exertion of the ride, but from the anticipation of seeing Helen Graham. The mysterious tenant had become the center of his thoughts, her presence a constant whisper in the back of his mind. As he approached the weathered facade of Wildfell Hall, the wind carried the scent of heather and wild roses, nature's own welcome. Dismounting with practiced ease, Gilbert smoothed his coat and ran a hand through his wind-tousled hair. He recalled their last encounter, when Helen had shown him her paintings. The memory was vivid, almost tangible. He could still see the way her eyes lit up as she explained each piece, her passion evident in every word and gesture. The canvases had come alive under her touch, each brushstroke a testament to her talent and the depth of her emotions. Gilbert knocked on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing through the old stone walls. When Helen opened it, the afternoon sun caught in her dark hair, creating a halo effect that took his breath away. Her smile, though reserved, was warm enough to chase away the chill of the Yorkshire air. "Mr. Markham," she greeted him, her voice a melody that stirred something deep within him. "What brings you to Wildfell Hall today?" "Miss Graham," he replied, tipping his hat. "I thought we might discuss the recent developments in crop rotation. And perhaps," he added with a hopeful smile, "you might show me more of your artwork." As they settled into the drawing room, Gilbert couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between Helen's delicate appearance and the strength of character that radiated from her. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on topics far beyond farming. They debated the merits of various authors, their words painting pictures as vivid as Helen's artwork. Young Arthur's laughter echoed through the halls, a joyous counterpoint to the serious discussions of the adults. Gilbert watched as Helen's face softened at the sound, her love for her son evident in every glance, every gentle word. Outside the protective walls of Wildfell Hall, however, a storm was brewing. The village buzzed with speculation, fueled by the malicious whispers of Eliza Millward. Her rumors about Helen's character grew more outlandish with each retelling, spreading like wildfire through the tight-knit community. Gilbert's own mother, Mrs. Markham, had cornered him over tea just the day before. Her brow had been furrowed with disapproval as she voiced her concerns. "That woman's influence on our community worries me, Gilbert. Her ideas about child-rearing are most unconventional. It's not natural for a woman to be so independent." The memory of his mother's words stirred a fierce protectiveness in Gilbert. He had defended Helen then, and he would continue to do so. "Perhaps her methods are different," he had argued, "but have you seen how well-behaved and intelligent young Arthur is? Surely that speaks to the effectiveness of her parenting." As the afternoon wore on, Gilbert found himself reluctant to leave. Each moment in Helen's presence only deepened his fascination. He watched as she moved about the room, her grace and poise a stark contrast to the rough-hewn stone walls around them. The local squire, Mr. Lawrence, added another layer of intrigue to the situation. His unusually protective behavior towards Helen had not gone unnoticed, fueling further gossip about a possible secret connection between them. Gilbert felt a twinge of jealousy at the thought, though he tried to push such feelings aside. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the moors, Gilbert knew he could delay no longer. He stood at the door, drinking in the sight of Helen's face, committing every detail to memory. Despite her attempts to maintain a distance between them, Gilbert knew with a certainty that shook him to his core that he was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with the mysterious tenant of Wildfell Hall. "Until next time, Miss Graham," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Helen's eyes met his, a flicker of something, longing? Fear? Passing through them before she quickly looked away. "Good evening, Mr. Markham," she replied softly, her hand lingering on the door frame. As Gilbert rode away, the cool evening air did nothing to quell the fire burning in his heart. He was determined to unravel the mystery of Helen Graham, to break through the walls she had built around herself. Little did he know that his pursuit would lead him down a path of passion, heartbreak, and a truth more shocking than any village gossip could have imagined. Gilbert's heart burned with a fierce intensity that both thrilled and terrified him. Despite his ardent attempts to court Helen, she remained steadfast in her rejection, leaving him bewildered and frustrated. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, a bittersweet reminder of the changing seasons and his own tumultuous emotions. As Gilbert made his way to Wildfell Hall, his footsteps crunched on the gravel path, each step echoing the pounding of his heart. The old stone building loomed before him, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the fading light. He paused at the entrance, gathering his courage before knocking on the heavy wooden door. Helen answered, her presence as always both a balm and a torment to Gilbert's senses. Her eyes, deep and mysterious as a moonlit lake, seemed to hold secrets he longed to unravel. The soft curve of her lips, the gentle sweep of her hair, every detail etched itself into his memory. "I cannot entertain your advances, Gilbert," Helen said, her voice soft but firm as steel. "My son and my past experiences demand caution. Please understand." Gilbert's face fell, his dreams shattering like delicate glass. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. "But Helen, surely you must see how devoted I am to you," he pleaded, reaching for her hand. She withdrew, creating a chasm between them that felt as wide as the moor stretching beyond the hall. "Friendship is all I can offer," she replied, her words a gentle but unyielding barrier. Their interactions became a delicate dance, fraught with unspoken desires and carefully maintained boundaries. Gilbert found himself analyzing every word, every glance, searching for a crack in Helen's resolve. The rustle of her skirts, the soft cadence of her voice, each moment in her presence was both exquisite and agonizing. Meanwhile, the engagement of Gilbert's sister Rose to Frederick Lawrence added a new layer of complexity to the situation. Frederick's frequent visits to Wildfell Hall stirred a tempest of emotions in Gilbert's heart. Jealousy, that green-eyed monster, sank its claws deep into his soul, poisoning his thoughts and clouding his judgment. One misty evening, as shadows lengthened across the grounds of Wildfell Hall, Gilbert's world tilted on its axis. Through the gathering gloom, he spied Helen and Frederick in what appeared to be an intimate embrace. The sight was like a dagger to his heart, twisting with each passing second. The mist seemed to thicken around him, mirroring the confusion and pain that clouded his mind. Rage and hurt clouded Gilbert's judgment, turning his usually gentle nature into something dark and unrecognizable. The next day, as Frederick rode along a lonely stretch of road, Gilbert's pent-up emotions exploded in a violent confrontation. The air crackled with tension, the very atmosphere seeming to hold its breath in anticipation of the impending storm. The crack of the whip echoed through the air as Gilbert lashed out, his actions fueled by blind fury. Frederick's cry of pain and shock seemed to come from a great distance, barely penetrating the red haze of Gilbert's anger. The sound of hooves on dirt, the whistle of the whip, the sharp intake of breath, these sensations burned themselves into Gilbert's memory, a stark reminder of his loss of control. The aftermath of this impulsive act sent ripples through the community. Gilbert's family recoiled in horror at his uncharacteristic violence. Helen, her trust shaken, regarded him with new wariness, her eyes now holding not mystery but disappointment. The weight of their gazes pressed down on Gilbert, each look a silent accusation. Gossip spread through the village like wildfire, fanned by the winds of speculation. Whispers of an illicit affair between Helen and Frederick grew louder, turning sideways glances into open stares of judgment. The very air seemed thick with suspicion, every conversation tinged with the bitter taste of scandal. Gilbert's friendship with Lawrence lay in tatters, the demand for an explanation hanging between them like an insurmountable wall. The once close bond now seemed as fragile as a cobweb in a storm, ready to disintegrate at the slightest touch. As the days wore on, Helen found herself increasingly isolated, the subject of scrutiny and whispered conversations that fell silent at her approach. The walls of Wildfell Hall, once a sanctuary, now felt more like a prison of public opinion. The whispers seemed to follow her like shadows, clinging to her skirts and echoing in every room. The tension in the community reached a fever pitch, with every interaction charged with unspoken accusations and barely concealed curiosity. Helen stood at the center of this maelstrom, her head held high despite the weight of judgment pressing down upon her. The air crackled with tension, each day bringing new challenges and fresh wounds. As the sun set on another day filled with strained silences and pointed looks, Gilbert found himself standing at the edge of the moors, the wind whipping around him. The vast expanse of heather and gorse stretched out before him, a reflection of the turmoil in his heart. He turned back towards Wildfell Hall, its silhouette dark against the fading light. In that moment, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the shadows of the hall, moving with purpose towards the old oak tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the property. As Gilbert squinted through the gathering darkness, his heart leapt into his throat. It was Helen, and in her hand she clutched what appeared to be a book. No, not a book but a journal. With trembling fingers, she seemed to be writing furiously, her face a mask of determination and... was that resolve? Gilbert's mind raced. What secrets could Helen be committing to paper? And why now in the dead of night, when she thought no one was watching? As he stood frozen, torn between approaching her and respecting her privacy, Helen suddenly looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that instant, Gilbert knew that everything was about to change. Time slipped away like sand through an hourglass, revealing the true nature of Arthur's character. Helen watched with growing dismay as her husband's facade crumbled before her eyes. The grand halls of Grassdale Manor, once filled with the promise of love and happiness, now echoed with an eerie emptiness. Helen's footsteps resonated through the corridors as she searched for Arthur, the scent of stale wine growing stronger with each step. Arthur's occasional glass of wine had morphed into an insatiable thirst for spirits. Days blended into a hazy fog of alcohol-fueled nights, leaving Helen adrift in a sea of loneliness. She'd find herself staring out the window, watching the seasons change in the sprawling gardens, feeling as trapped as a bird in a gilded cage. "Arthur!" she'd call out, her voice barely above a whisper. But more often than not, she was met with silence or the distant sound of a slamming door. London's gentlemen's clubs had become Arthur's second home, their siren call of cards, dice, and questionable company proving irresistible. Each time he left, Helen's heart sank a little deeper, like a stone tossed into a bottomless well. The slam of the front door became a painful punctuation to their failing marriage. When Helen finally mustered the courage to confront him, Arthur's words cut deeper than any knife. "You're suffocating me with your morals," he'd sneer, his words slurring together like spilled ink. "I'm a grown man, Helen. I don't need a wife who acts like my mother." The air between them crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. Helen's pleas fell on deaf ears, each attempt at reconciliation met with cruel laughter or icy indifference. The warmth that once filled their home had been replaced by a chill that seeped into Helen's very bones. The final blow came wrapped in silk and perfume. Lady Loughborough arrived at Grassdale, her coy smiles and lingering touches leaving no doubt about her intentions. Helen's stomach churned as she watched Arthur's eyes follow the woman's every move, his infidelity no longer hidden in the shadows of London but paraded before her like a macabre spectacle. The birth of little Arthur brought a fleeting moment of hope, a tiny candle flame in the darkness. For a brief, shining instant, Helen saw a change in her husband's eyes as he held their son. But like morning dew under a harsh sun, that tenderness evaporated all too quickly, leaving behind only the bitter dregs of disappointment. Arthur's friends became unwelcome fixtures at Grassdale, their raucous laughter and clinking glasses a constant reminder of Helen's isolation. Lord Loughborough and Mr. Hattersley, cut from the same tattered cloth as Arthur, encouraged his worst impulses. Helen would often find herself pressed against the library door, her ear straining to catch their boisterous tales of conquest and debauchery, each word another nail in the coffin of her marriage. As Arthur's vices grew, so did the mountain of debt threatening to bury them. Helen watched helplessly as her husband gambled away their future, the stack of unpaid bills growing as quickly as the empty bottles in his study. Grassdale, once a symbol of prosperity, began to show signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the walls, gardens overgrew, and the air hung heavy with the musty scent of decay. Nights that were once filled with tender whispers and gentle caresses now echoed with bitter arguments and cold silences. The bedroom, once a sanctuary of love, became a battlefield. "You're pathetic," Arthur would spit, his words laced with venom. "Can't you see I'm having fun? Or are you too busy being a saint to understand what that means?" Each cruel word was like a physical blow, leaving Helen bruised and battered on the inside. She'd curl up in bed, clutching little Arthur close, wondering how the man she'd fallen in love with had transformed into this monster. With each passing day, Helen felt the walls of her world closing in. The woman who had once dreamed of a loving partnership now found herself a prisoner, trapped by society's expectations and her own fading hope for redemption. As she gazed out the window at the sprawling, neglected grounds of Grassdale, Helen couldn't help but wonder if this gilded cage would be her fate forever. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn, a spark of defiance ignited in Helen's heart. She looked down at her sleeping son, his innocent face a reminder of all she had to fight for. With trembling hands, she reached for a quill and paper, determined to chart a new course for their future. The once grand halls of Grassdale Manor now echoed with a heavy silence, broken only by the soft padding of Helen's footsteps as she approached her husband's study. The air was thick with tension, carrying the faint scent of stale whiskey and regret. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raised her hand to knock, the folded letter clutched tightly in her other hand. What would Arthur's reaction be to her decision? And more importantly, did she have the strength to follow through with her plan? The once grand halls of Grassdale Manor now echoed with a heavy silence, broken only by the soft padding of Helen's footsteps as she approached her husband. The air was thick with tension, carrying the faint scent of stale whiskey and regret. On a crisp autumn morning, Helen found Arthur slumped in his favorite armchair, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. She knelt beside him, her heart racing with hope and trepidation. "My dear," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "can we not recapture the joy we once shared?" Arthur's gaze met hers, a mixture of confusion and irritation clouding his features. The warmth that once filled their shared glances had long since faded, replaced by an icy chill that sent shivers down Helen's spine. Undeterred, Helen pressed on, her words painting vivid pictures of a future where their son would grow up with a father he could admire. But her pleas seemed to bounce off Arthur like raindrops on a window pane, leaving him unmoved and increasingly agitated. As days turned to weeks, Helen's tactics shifted. With trembling hands, she began hiding Arthur's prized bottles of spirits. Each clink of glass against wood felt like a betrayal, the the sound echoing in her ears long after the deed was done. She tightened the purse strings, her stomach knotting with anxiety as she imagined Arthur's fury upon discovering his gambling funds curtailed. The manor buzzed with activity as Helen orchestrated a parade of respectable guests and wholesome diversions. Laughter echoed through the gardens during afternoon teas, the scent of freshly cut roses mingling with the aroma of Earl Grey. The drawing room came alive with music and intellectual discourse, but Arthur skulked on the periphery, his eyes darting longingly towards the locked liquor cabinet. In moments of desperation, Helen turned to Arthur's friends, her voice low and urgent as she implored them to be a positive influence. But her words fell on deaf ears, met with knowing smirks and dismissive shrugs. Let the man live a little, they'd say, clapping Arthur on the back and steering him towards the nearest tavern. The air in Grassdale grew thick with tension, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Arthur's anger erupted in sudden bursts, his words lashing out like whips. "You're suffocating me, Helen," he'd roar, his face flushed with rage, spittle flying from his lips. "Must you strip away every ounce of joy from my life?" Helen stood her ground, a solitary oak in a tempest, even as each accusation cut deep. Meals became battlegrounds, forks scraping plates like swords on shields. The silence between bites was deafening, filled only with the weight of unspoken words and shattered dreams. In quieter moments, Helen would cradle their son, his tiny fingers curling around hers as she whispered promises of a better future. She'd approach Arthur, the child a living reminder of their shared responsibility. "Look at him, Arthur," she'd plead, her voice barely above a whisper, tears glistening in her eyes. "Don't you want to be the father he deserves?" But Arthur would turn away, muttering about Helen's dramatics and excessive worrying. Each dismissal chipped away at Helen's resolve, like waves eroding a cliff face. As autumn leaves began to fall, so too did Helen's hopes. The fire of determination that once burned so brightly now flickered, threatened by the cold winds of reality. She found herself standing at the window, staring out at the sprawling grounds of Grassdale, feeling more trapped than ever. The world beyond the manor gates seemed to taunt her with its promise of freedom and peace. In the stillness of the night, a thought took root in Helen's mind, growing stronger with each passing day. It was a thought that both terrified and liberated her, the possibility of leaving. As she contemplated this unthinkable option, Helen realized that her efforts to reform Arthur may have been in vain. The weight of this realization settled on her shoulders, heavy as a winter cloak. Helen's gaze fell upon her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. A fierce protectiveness surged within her, mingling with a growing sense of dread. As she watched him sleep, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if Arthur's influence was already taking hold? The innocence of her child's face suddenly seemed fragile, threatened by the very man who should have been his protector and guide. With trembling fingers, Helen reached for her journal, determined to record her fears and hopes for the future. As she put pen to paper, she couldn't shake the feeling that her next entry might be the most important one she'd ever write, a plan that could change their lives forever. As little Arthur grew from a helpless infant to a curious toddler, Helen's heart swelled with love and pride. However, her joy was soon overshadowed by a growing sense of unease as she observed her husband's influence on their son. The once charming Arthur Huntingdon had begun to reveal a darker side of his nature. Like a creeping fog, his behavior seeped into every corner of their once happy home, leaving a chill in its wake. Helen watched, her stomach knotting with dread, as her husband seemed to take a perverse pleasure in corrupting their innocent child. One crisp autumn afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, Helen's ears pricked at the sound of her son's laughter, followed by her husband's booming voice. She entered the drawing room, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, to find Arthur bouncing the boy on his knee, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Come on, my little man," Arthur coaxed, his words slightly slurred from the brandy at his elbow. The crystal decanter caught the light, casting amber shadows across the room.
"Say it again for Papa. Come now, don't be shy."
Little Arthur giggled, then uttered a word that made Helen's blood run cold, a vulgarity no child should know, let alone speak. Arthur roared with laughter, praising the boy and offering him a sweet from his pocket.
"Arthur, please,"
Helen cried, rushing to scoop up her son. The child's soft warmth against her chest did little to calm her racing heart. "Don't encourage such language." Her husband's face darkened like a storm cloud, his eyes flashing with anger.
"Oh, come now, Helen. Don't be such a prude.
A few colorful words never hurt anyone. You'll turn the boy into a milksop if you have your way." As the weeks passed, Helen's concerns deepened, etching worry lines into her once smooth brow. She'd find Arthur giving their son sips of wine at dinner, dismissing her objections with a wave of his hand. "It'll put hair on his chest," he'd declare, as if poisoning a child was a mark of good parenting. The manor became a revolving door of Arthur's dissolute friends, each seemingly competing to be a worse influence than the last. They'd stumble through the halls at all hours, their raucous laughter and drunken antics echoing through the once peaceful home. Little Arthur watched it all with wide, impressionable eyes, soaking in every detail like a sponge. Helen felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, watching her son being pulled towards the precipice. Every attempt to discipline the boy or instill proper values was met with mockery from her husband. "Listen to your mother, boy," Arthur would say with a wink, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She knows what's best, doesn't she? Always trying to spoil our fun." The situation came to a head one stormy night. Thunder rattled the windows as Helen awoke to the sound of riotous laughter from downstairs. A party was in full swing, the kind that always left Helen feeling sick with worry. Unable to shake her unease, she donned her dressing gown, the silk cool against her flushed skin, and made her way to the source of the commotion. The scene that greeted her in the billiard room would be forever seared into her memory. Little Arthur, barely steady on his feet, was tottering between the men, a glass of amber liquid clutched in his tiny hand. The room spun with cigar smoke and the stench of spilled liquor as Arthur and his friends roared with laughter at the child's clumsy attempts to drink. "That's it, my boy," Arthur cheered, his face flushed with drink and cruel amusement. "Show these gentlemen how a real man holds his liquor." As if on cue, the little boy's face turned pale. He swayed, then doubled over, retching onto the expensive carpet. The men's laughter reached a fever pitch, but to Helen, it sounded like the cackle of demons. In that moment, something inside Helen hardened like steel. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for months crystallized into iron resolve. She swept into the room, gathering her son into her arms, heedless of the mess. "This ends now," she declared, her voice low and dangerous. The laughter died away, replaced by an uneasy silence. As Helen carried her whimpering child from the room, she knew with absolute certainty that she could no longer stand idly by. The toxic environment that her husband had created posed a grave danger to her son's moral and physical well-being. Options she had previously thought unthinkable now loomed before her as stark necessities. Cradling little Arthur close, feeling his fevered brow against her cheek, Helen made a silent vow. She would protect her son at all costs, even if it meant taking drastic action against the man she had once loved. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Helen knew she had no choice. For the sake of her child, she would find a way to escape the prison that Grassdale had become. As she laid her son in his bed, gently wiping his tear-stained face, a plan began to form in Helen's mind. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but she could see no other way. With trembling hands, she began to gather what they would need for their escape. But as she moved about the room, a floorboard creaked behind her. Helen whirled around, her heart in her throat, to find Arthur standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Helen's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and resolve. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her son's very soul was in peril if he remained under Arthur's corrupting influence. The manor creaked and groaned in the dead of night, as if sharing Helen's burden. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by flickering candlelight, as she whispered her desperate plan to Frederick Lawrence, her trusted brother. His eyes, wide with concern, reflected the flame's unsteady light. "Are you certain, Helen?" he breathed, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. The air between them felt thick with the weight of their conspiracy. Days blurred into weeks, then months. Helen's life became a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Each brushstroke of her paintings now carried double meaning, art for art's sake, and a step towards freedom. The soft clink of coins joining her secret stash became a lullaby of hope, drowning out Arthur's drunken snores that echoed through the halls at night. With trembling hands, Helen gathered their essentials. A worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, little Arthur's favorite woolen sweater, a locket containing a curl of her mother's hair. Each item, carefully wrapped and hidden, became a talisman of the life they were leaving behind and the future they dared to dream of. Night after sleepless night, Helen lay rigid in bed, every muscle tense as she mentally traced their escape route. The stakes loomed impossibly high in her mind. Discovery meant losing her son forever, a thought that sent icy tendrils of dread curling through her chest. Then, like a ray of sunlight piercing storm clouds, opportunity presented itself. Arthur announced another trip to London, his eyes already glassy with anticipation of debauchery. As his carriage wheels crunched down the gravel drive, Helen's heart leapt into her throat. This was it. Rachel, her maid whose quiet strength had been a lifeline, sprang into action alongside Helen. Under the cover of a moonless night, they moved like ghosts through the silent house. Every creak of a floorboard sounded like a gunshot in Helen's ears. Scooping up her sleeping son, Helen cradled him close. His warm weight against her chest steeled her resolve, reminding her of everything she fought for. They slipped out into the night, the cool air carrying the scent of damp earth and possibility. The journey was a fevered dream of fear and exhilaration. Every distant light became a potential pursuer in Helen's mind. The carriage jostled over rutted back roads, each bump threatening to wake little Arthur. Helen whispered soothing nonsense to him, her words a shield against the unknown. As dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, Wildfell Hall loomed before them. Its dilapidated facade, windows like hollow eyes, seemed to Helen the most beautiful sight she'd ever beheld. This crumbling structure would be their sanctuary, their new beginning. In the days that followed, Helen Graham emerged from the ashes of Helen Huntingdon. She set up a modest studio, sunlight streaming through grimy windows, illuminating her easel like a beacon of hope. The fear of discovery never fully left her, a constant shadow at the edge of her vision, but it was tempered by a growing sense of freedom. That first night in Wildfell Hall, as Helen tucked her son into a makeshift bed, she allowed herself a moment of fierce pride. She had done the unthinkable, defied society, her husband, and the law, all for love. Whatever judgment came, she would face it, knowing she had saved her child from a path of ruin. As sleep finally claimed her, Helen's last thoughts were of the diary she had begun, chronicling their journey. She had poured her heart onto those pages, a testament to her struggles and triumphs. Little did she know that those very words would soon fall into the hands of another, unraveling the carefully woven tapestry of her new life. Gilbert Markham closed the leather-bound volume, his fingers lingering on its worn cover. The world around him seemed to shift, Helen's story burning bright in his mind. He now possessed a key to unlock the mystery of the widow of Wildfell Hall, but at what cost to them both? Gilbert set down Helen's diary, his mind spinning from the revelations within its pages. He now possessed a deep understanding of her past and the reasons behind her guarded behavior. The weight of Helen's story pressed upon his heart, a mixture of sorrow and admiration swirling within him like leaves caught in an autumn gust. Unable to contain the surge of emotions, Gilbert set out to find Helen. The crisp air bit at his cheeks as he strode across the grounds, fallen leaves crunching beneath his feet. The world around him seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. He found her near the old oak tree, her figure a dark silhouette against the fiery canvas of the setting sun. For a moment, Gilbert simply stood there, drinking in the sight of her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Helen," he called softly, his voice catching in his throat. She turned, her eyes widening as she took in his expression. In that moment, words seemed as fragile as spun glass. Gilbert closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were cold, he noticed, and trembling slightly. "I know everything now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want you to know that nothing has changed. My feelings for you have only grown stronger." Helen's eyes glistened with unshed tears, like dew on morning grass. "Gilbert, you don't have to explain," he interrupted gently, squeezing her hands. "Your strength, your resilience. Helen, you're the bravest person I've ever known." A single tear escaped, trailing down Helen's cheek like a silent confession. Gilbert reached up, brushing it away with his thumb. The tender gesture seemed to break down the last of Helen's defenses, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure of a raging river. "I've been so afraid," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves.
Afraid to trust, to hope.
Gilbert pulled her close, enveloping her in a warm embrace. The scent of lavender from her hair filled his senses, grounding him in this moment.
You don't have to be afraid anymore.
"I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." As they stood there, the world seemed to fade away. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a fitting backdrop to the new chapter unfolding in their lives. The old oak tree stood sentinel, its branches creaking softly in the evening breeze, as if whispering ancient secrets of love and redemption. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the gardens, Gilbert and Helen spoke of the future. Their words were filled with hope and possibility, like delicate seedlings pushing through the soil after a long winter. The flowers around them, though fading with the season, seemed to perk up at their passing, as if sensing the promise of new beginnings.
"What about Arthur?"
Helen asked, her maternal instincts ever present in the slight furrow of her brow. Gilbert's face softened, his eyes crinkling at the corners.
"I already care for him, Helen."
"He's a part of you, and I want to be there for both of you." Helen's heart swelled with gratitude and affection. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life filled with love and happiness. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long seemed to lift, allowing her to breathe freely.
But fate, it seemed, had other plans.
As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the clip-clop of hooves broke the evening's tranquility. A messenger arrived at Wildfell Hall, his horse lathered with sweat, sides heaving. The urgency of his mission was written in every line of his body. Helen's face paled as she read the letter he delivered. Her hands trembled, and the paper crinkled in her grip. Gilbert watched as the color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the first frost of winter.
It's Arthur, she said, her voice hollow.
He's gravely ill. Gilbert felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach, heavy as a stone. He watched as a myriad of emotions flitted across Helen's face: shock, concern, and a deep-seated sense of duty. I have to go to him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gilbert's heart clenched, but he nodded in understanding. Of course you do, he said, his voice thick with emotion. As Helen hurriedly prepared for her journey, Gilbert helped in any way he could. The air was heavy with unspoken words and bittersweet farewells. The warmth of their earlier moments seemed to dissipate, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I'll entrust Arthur to Frederick, Helen said, referring to her brother. He'll be safe there until I return. Gilbert nodded, his throat tight.
And I'll be here, Helen.
Waiting for you. Their eyes met, 1,000 promises passing between them in that single glance. Then, with a final lingering touch, Helen was gone, riding off into the gathering darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving behind an emptiness that seemed to echo through the halls of Wildfell. Gilbert stood at the gate long after she had disappeared from view, his heart heavy with uncertainty. The future, once so bright with promise, now seemed as unpredictable as the wind that whipped around him, tugging at his clothes and hair. As he turned back towards Wildfell Hall, Gilbert made a silent vow. He would wait for Helen, no matter how long it took. For in her, he had found a love worth fighting for, a love that could weather any storm. But as the night deepened and stars began to prick the velvet sky, a nagging doubt crept into Gilbert's mind. Helen was returning to her past, to the very man she had fled from. What if she didn't come back? What if the pull of duty and old ties proved stronger than their newfound love? Gilbert's steps faltered as he reached the door of Wildfell Hall. He turned once more to look out into the darkness, his heart racing with a sudden, overwhelming fear. For at that moment, he realized that Helen's journey might not just be a temporary absence, but a final farewell. As Gilbert closed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the empty halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might have just witnessed the last chapter of their story, rather than the beginning of a new one. The warmth of Helen's touch still lingered on his skin, but it was fading fast, like the last embers of a dying fire. Helen's heart was heavy with anticipation as she arrived at Grassdale Manor. The weight of the impending reunion with her estranged husband, Arthur, pressed upon her like a physical burden. Helen's heart was heavy with anticipation as she arrived at Grassdale Manor. The weight of the impending reunion with her estranged husband, Arthur, pressed upon her like a physical burden. The once grand estate loomed before her, its weathered stone facade a silent testament to the passage of time and neglect. As she approached the main entrance, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet seemed to echo the unease in her chest. Stepping into the foyer, Helen was immediately struck by the oppressive atmosphere. The air hung thick and stale, carrying the unmistakable scent of illness and decay. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light that managed to penetrate the heavy curtains, giving the entire house an otherworldly, abandoned feel. With each step towards Arthur's bedroom, Helen's resolve wavered. The grand staircase, once a symbol of their shared prosperity, now felt like a mountain to climb. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch her with judging eyes, their painted faces a reminder of happier times long past. Finally, she reached the door to Arthur's chamber. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, Helen pushed it open. The sight that greeted her was a far cry from the vibrant man she had once known. Arthur lay in the massive four-poster bed, his form barely making an impression on the rumpled sheets. His skin, once tanned and healthy, now had a sickly pallor that made Helen's stomach clench. "Helen," Arthur croaked, his voice a shadow of its former strength.
"You came."
She nodded, momentarily robbed of speech by the stark reality before her. The room reeked of medicine and sweat, the heavy curtains blocking out most of the natural light. It felt more like a tomb than a bedroom. Over the next few days, Helen fell into a routine of care. She changed bandages with gentle efficiency, administered medicine with a steady hand, and adjusted pillows with a touch that was both compassionate and detached. All the while, she grappled with a storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Arthur's mood swung wildly between remorse and bitterness. In his lucid moments, he would reach for Helen's hand, his sunken eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he would whisper, his voice breaking. "For everything." But these glimpses of the man she once loved were often followed by fits of rage and self-pity. "Why did this happen to me?" he would cry, his weak fists pounding against the mattress.
"It's not fair."
Helen weathered these emotional tempests with a patience born of long suffering. She drew strength from her faith, silently reciting prayers as she went about her duties. The toll on her spirit was immense, but she refused to let it show, presenting a calm facade even as her heart ached. As Arthur's condition deteriorated, his confessions became more frequent and detailed. Each admission of infidelity felt like a dagger twisting in Helen's heart. He spoke of his descent into alcoholism and gambling addiction, painting a vivid picture of a man consumed by his vices. "I was weak," he admitted one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "I threw away everything good in my life.
You, our son.
I didn't deserve you." Helen listened, her face a mask of composure even as her emotions roiled beneath the surface. She had long since built walls around her heart, protecting herself from the cycle of hope and disappointment that had characterized their marriage. Yet, despite her best efforts, she found herself moved by his apparent remorse. The nights were the hardest. As Arthur slept fitfully, Helen would sit by the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. She allowed herself these moments of vulnerability, letting silent tears fall as she confronted the complex feelings she still harbored for her husband. Love, anger, pity, and regret swirled within her like leaves caught in an autumn wind. As death drew nearer, Arthur became more reflective. His moments of lucidity grew longer, and he used them to try and make amends. He spoke of their son with a tenderness that had been absent for years, expressing regret for the time he had lost. "I wish I could see him one last time," Arthur said softly, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the room.
To tell him I'm sorry.
To ask for his forgiveness. Helen felt her resolve wavering. The man before her was so different from the cruel, selfish husband she had fled. Could she find it in her heart to grant him this final request? In the end, it was Arthur's final plea that broke through Helen's defenses. As he lay there, his breath coming in short gasps, he turned to her with eyes full of genuine remorse. "Helen," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Can you ever forgive me?" In that moment, Helen felt the weight of their shared history pressing down on her. She thought of the pain, the betrayals, the years of heartache. But she also remembered the good times, fleeting though they were. With a deep breath, she made her decision. "I forgive you, Arthur," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. "And I'll bring our son to see you." A look of peace settled over Arthur's face, and for the first time in years, Helen saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved. As she left to fetch their child, she felt a sense of closure washing over her. Whatever happened next, she had found the strength to offer forgiveness and allow for a moment of reconciliation before Arthur's final breath. As Helen hurried to bring their son for a final meeting, a strange calm settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment of reconciliation would change everything. Little did she know that Arthur's impending death would set in motion a series of events that would transform her life in ways she could never have imagined. Arthur's death left Helen as the sole inheritor of Grassdale Manor and its vast estate. This unexpected turn of events catapulted her into a position of considerable wealth and social standing, transforming her circumstances almost overnight. The crisp autumn air nipped at Helen's cheeks as she stood before Wildfell Hall, her sanctuary during the darkest days of her life. The old stone building loomed against the gray sky, its weathered facade a testament to the passage of time. Memories swirled around her like fallen leaves, each one a reminder of the trials she had endured and overcome. With a deep breath, Helen pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar creak echoing through the empty halls. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the windows, lending an ethereal quality to the rooms she had once called home. Her footsteps echoed on the worn floorboards as she moved from room to room, her heart heavy with the weight of farewell. Outside, the Markhams and Millwards gathered, their faces a mixture of joy and sorrow. Helen embraced each of them in turn, the warmth of their bodies a stark contrast to the chill in the air. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." As the group dispersed, Helen's gaze fell upon Gilbert Markham. His eyes, once so full of warmth and affection, now held a guarded look. The invisible wall of her newfound status loomed between them, seemingly insurmountable. Gilbert turned away, his attention shifting to Eliza Millward, who hovered nearby with an expectant smile. Helen's heart clenched at the sight, a dull ache spreading through her chest. She longed to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had formed between them, but the words stuck in her throat. With a final lingering look at Wildfell Hall, she climbed into her carriage, the clip-clop of horses' hooves marking her departure from this chapter of her life. Days passed, blending into weeks. Helen settled into her new life at Staningley, her childhood home, but a sense of incompleteness nagged at her. She threw herself into her painting, finding solace in the sweep of her brush across canvas, but even her art couldn't fill the void left by Gilbert's absence. Meanwhile, Gilbert grappled with his own tumultuous emotions. He wandered the village, a restless spirit, his heart torn between what he believed was right and what he truly desired. The pond where he had often found peace now seemed to mock him with its placid surface, hiding depths of turmoil that mirror his own. It was on one such morning, as mist rose from the water's surface, that Frederick Lawrence found him. "Gilbert," Frederick called, his voice cutting through the fog of Gilbert's melancholy. "You're making a grave mistake." Gilbert turned, surprise etched on his features.
What do you mean?
Frederick's eyes held a knowing gleam. Helen's feelings for you haven't changed. Her wealth doesn't define her heart. Hope bloomed in Gilbert's chest, fragile as the first spring blossom. But how can you be sure? A smile played at the corners of Frederick's mouth.
Trust me, my friend. Go to her.
She's at Staningley. The countryside blurred past as Gilbert's horse thundered along the road to Staningley. His heart pounded in time with the animal's hooves, each beat bringing him closer to Helen. The grand house rose before him, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun like beacons of hope. And there, in the garden, was Helen. She sat before an easel, her brush dancing across the canvas, just as she had when he first saw her at Wildfell Hall. Time seemed to stand still as their eyes met across the expanse of manicured lawn. Helen's brush clattered to the ground, forgotten. In 3 long strides, Gilbert crossed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms. The scent of lavender and paint enveloped him, achingly familiar. "Gilbert," Helen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never dared hope." He cupped her face gently, drinking in the sight of her.
I'm here, Helen.
"If you'll have me, I'm yours." Their reunion was interrupted by the patter of small feet on gravel. Young Arthur, his cheeks flushed with exertion, ran towards them. His eyes, so like his mother's, widened with curiosity as he took in the sight of the stranger holding her. Helen's face softened as she introduced her son to Gilbert. The boy, starved for a positive male role model, took to Gilbert immediately. As days turned to weeks, Gilbert found himself falling in love not just with Helen, but with her son as well. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Gilbert led Helen to the garden where they had reunited. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began its evening song. Gilbert dropped to one knee, his heart thundering in his chest. "Helen," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Helen's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. They embraced, their hearts beating as one, the promise of a shared future stretching out before them like an endless horizon. Their wedding was a simple affair, filled with love and laughter. As they exchanged vows, Gilbert and Helen's families merged, creating a tapestry of love and support that would sustain them through the years to come. At Staningley, they built a life together, each day a testament to the power of love and perseverance. Gilbert proved to be the husband Helen had always dreamed of, supportive, kind, and deeply devoted. For young Arthur, he became the father figure the boy had desperately needed, guiding him with patience and understanding. As the years passed, the wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by the joy of their present and the promise of their future. Helen, Gilbert, and Arthur formed a happy, united family, their love for each other a beacon of hope in a world that had once seemed so dark. Their union stood as a triumph over adversity, a testament to the enduring power of love. For Helen, who had endured so much, it was the realization of a dream long deferred, a life filled with happiness, security, and the deep, abiding love she had always yearned for but never thought possible. As the sun set on another day at Staningley, Helen stood at the window, watching Gilbert and Arthur in the garden below. Their laughter floated up to her on the evening breeze, a melody sweeter than any she had ever known. With a contented sigh, she turned away from the window, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for the life she now led, a life built on the foundations of hope, perseverance, and above all love.